A narrative in the world of combat sports that boxing viewership is declining, with longtime home of boxing, HBO, declining to continue to air fights on their channel. Is that because we live in a time of viewer curated viewing experiences or a lack of interest in the sport altogether? UFC has gained a lot of attention since Dana White pulled it out of the extreme fighting world to something more commonplace, making Brazilian Jiu Jitsu as common in gyms as karate was in the 80s. Dana White, a Suge Knight type character. I can't think of another president of a fighting league that is actually bigger than the league itself. In steps Jake and Logan Paul, social media celebrities that had a brief stint on Disney. The Pauls position themselves as disruptors of the combat sports industry, coming into fighting by challenging other YouTubers, but they have pivoted to fighting older MMA fighters to boxing matches. While these matches have gained some pay-per-view success, they are not the record-breaking claims that the Paul brothers throw out. Out of the top five pay-per-view events of all time, 4 are boxing matches, and none of the top 18 pay-per-view events of all time include any of the Paul brothers matches. The Paul brothers have seemed to do one thing right, and they learned it from the former 45th president, Donald Trump. Everyone loves the villain. To root for the bad guy or to see the perceived bad guy lose, being the antagonist has been financially advantageous for the Paul brothers. They were able to pivot from being online punching bags to literal punching bags, but it's paying off with massive dividends. Their fights bring in millions of dollars for them. And while they may challenge people like Daniel White on his unfair pay structures, what do the Pauls truly offer? Are they trying to bring fairness in this carnival of sport, or just take the place of one of the biggest names in fighting? Let's not get it twisted. These guys don't care about labor rights or human rights, for that matter, having one of their fights in Saudi Arabia. Recently, Jake Paul said he was a great boxer because he brings people to watch his fights. On a recent Netflix documentary that was more of a propaganda short for the Paul fighting burgeoning empire, ex-champion Mike Tyson says he likes watching people that can bring butts in seats. So are the Pauls, by their very nature of being box office draws, great fighters? Excuse me. If being a YouTube influencer brings eyeballs to the ring, what does that mean for traditional fighters and up-and-comers if they can be leapfrogged on cards by people with less skill but more social media clout? I call on my brothers to discuss this, and I am opening up the phone lines. We're going to get a little discussion first. I figure if we get a little discussion first, it can piss you guys off listening enough. And then you can call in all angry, and you get to choose who you want to fight.
Well, I'd like to point out
Jason's gonna rename this the Jamal Rome Show.
You know, there's a couple of things that happened before the Paul brothers came into the breach, which is there hasn't been a decent American heavyweight in forever.
That's a good point.
I think that's affected boxing, incalculably. Anyway, very much so. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is like Floyd Mayweather is the one who started fighting these ridiculous exhibition fights. And one of the fights that you mentioned, that was one of the 5 biggest fights, was Floyd versus Conor McGregor. And as I mentioned to you, I remember because I used to, box out of the Wild Card Gym. I'm friends with Freddie Roach and that group. And Floyd went to Freddie and asked him, can you get Conor ready to fight and make it look like a show? And Freddie said, I don't think so. But he found somebody else to do it. I mean, Floyd carried him in that fight, but a lot of people watched that fight. It got
It's the second most watched fight of all time. I'll read you guys right now a list of the most watched fights on pay-per-view, and it is Mayweather versus Pacquiao. That was the fight we all waited for, and it happened too late, I think. Mayweather versus McGregor. UFC 229, which is a McGregor fight. De La Hoya versus Mayweather. And Mayweather versus Canelo. The one it was good. It's in 2013, it says.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And Floyd kicked off the Paul brothers run because he fought an exhibition with Logan.
Yeah.
You know, why is Floyd, fighting these people and giving them credibility? Because Floyd likes money and he doesn't like losing. So those are two of the reasons.
I mean, that's like, and something that you said, Bill, was like, there hasn't been a good heavyweight in, like decades, like, and that hurts boxing, and like, I don't think I've ever really gone to the violent video games and violent movies type of argument. But I do think that if like that type of thing has any real effect on culture, it is it's readjusting the tolerance for violence for the audience, and in which case, boxing loses that appeal, that violent appeal, because the audience is destigmatized, amongst of other things, and of course UFC being one of those things, like, or at least Pride Fighting Championships and all that type of stuff starts raising up, and yeah, you see people, I think, want more spectacle, and kind of like going away from that, and literally, like, because like that's what it's like, you see it where people are buying into spectacle, and whether, because like, and that's where too, it's like, I'm actually kind of impressed with like the way Floyd Mayweather fights as a very more like technical fucking fighter, not, like, he's not knocking people out, like getting in like these exciting bouts. He's fucking playing defense and and taking shots when he gets and wins off fucking points. Like, that's not exactly exciting, but still he's getting those views, and that's like personality. That's people buying into the fact that it's like, is he going to lose is now his shtick.
Are people viewing? Can I ask you guys this? Are people viewing to watch him lose, much like they view the
I think so,
Pauls?
yes.
You think
Well,
so?
I mean, the big thing with Floyd now is he doesn't, like, he went out on top. He beat Marciano's record, right? Or he tied it. So he doesn't fight real fights anymore. Like Bill had mentioned, he did that bullshit exhibition against like the Japanese kickboxer, and the thing is, it's like, and I tell people this all the time, there is a huge difference from throwing a punch when you're a boxer than there is when you're throwing a punch with 4-ounce gloves on in an MMA cage, right? When you're only wearing 4-ounce gloves, you are not going balls out. You'll break your hands in the first round and you're done, right? So, and on top of that, it's like wearing cotton, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like having 2 little pieces of cotton on the back of your hands, right?
Do they even get hand wraps in UFC? Do you get hand wraps?
Yeah, they do. But you wear 13-ounce gloves, man. I'm telling you right now, like during the McGregor Mayweather fight, you could tell McGregor was gassed by the 3rd round because he couldn't keep his hands up anymore, right?
Yeah.
He's not used to wearing 13-ounce gloves, and that's, there's other intricacies in the differences between boxing and mixed martial arts. Like, they're both amazing things, right? Amazing athletes are competing in these sports, but I really wish we would stop trying to connect the two, because they're 2 totally different games.
And most MMA guys can't break an egg. I hate to tell you. They're great at that jiu-jitsu wrestling. But I want to throw in one thing that happened years ago at the Wild Card is when they had the celebrity boxing, we had Greg Brady training in the gym for a while.
You mean the guy that played Greg Brady?
Yeah, and he fought Screech. And the first time they had celebrity boxing, the ratings were through the roof.
Yeah,
they were like American Idol. And afterwards, somebody asked Freddie, it's like, well, why do you think that happened? And Freddie goes, because everybody likes a good fight. And in some ways, what the Paul brothers do, I mean, I sent you guys a note. I mean, I watched that way too much of that Nate Diaz Jake Paul
You were
fight.
breaking down game film.
And neither one of them, they both have their hands down and they don't have any head movement and they're just whacking each other. And there is a certain level of like it's like a street brawl. They're just, beating the crap out of one another. And Jake's so obviously juiced out of his mind.
Thank you for saying that.
Yep.
Thank you for fucking saying that. I was watching that fight. I was in TJ and I walked down the street and there's this big open food court in TJ. I don't know if you guys I'm sure Bill has crazy TJ stories. And there's this great food court and they were showing a fight. We walked in and I watched that fight and I was like, Jake Paul is so juiced. That fool's nipples are as long as my fingers.
I saw an interview with Nate Diaz and they were asking him, they mentioned the steroids thing. And Nate Diaz says, everybody I fight's on steroids. I'm not worried about it. And it was the most honest thing I've ever heard. Because I hate to tell you, Floyd used to juice. Guys from my gym, who I don't want to mention, used to juice because it's my gym. I used the one thing I used to do is James Toney used to make me spar with him, and he ended up being a heavyweight champ, and he lost the heavyweight championship. And the only amazing thing to us wasn't that he got caught juicing. What was amazing to us is that, okay, hopefully James isn't listening to this, but James is so cheap. He didn't get the good trainer to mask the steroids, because James never really liked to spend money on anything.
You can't really blame him, Bill. He spent 15 years at cruiserweight, and if you are boxing, you are not getting paid if you are fighting in cruiserweight. It just does not happen. Like, you show up, you unify all the belts, right? Because there's 4 sanctioning bodies plus a 5th that's trying to become a member of the Big 4, right? And you show up, you've unified all the belts. You're like, yeah, I just fucking whooped the shit out of this still champ. You go to the back and they hand you like $6 in cash, and they're like, you fight a cruiserweight. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares.
He got the big paydays was at heavyweight, and he still is the only one that's ever knocked out Evander Holyfield and the only one to ever knock out John Ruiz. And the worst part about James wasn't so much that he bulked up with the steroids, but he originally was fighting at 220 in the heavyweight fights. And then suddenly he's fighting at 250. And I always remember you could tell how slow he was. And Freddie, I was at the gym, and Freddie goes, Bill, you could hit him now. And when I used to spar with him, I couldn't hit him. Like, he was like a ghost standing right in front of you. So,
well, dude,
but I tell you what, I could hit Jake Paul 100 times even at my age and being out of shape. That guy's bucket head right.
I don't know about you, Bill, but watching that fight, I figured Diaz would at least have good footwork, considering a lot of his game in a cage is predicated off throwing lots of jabs, moving away, circling away from the dominant hand, and then shooting for takedown, right? He just kind of walked forward the entire fight, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? He just stood there.
It's weird about MMA guys because, the first guy that used to come in the gym with Freddie was BJ Penn. And then George St. Pierre started coming in. And both of those guys would learn some boxing moves, but then all of them came in and they were most of them were terrible. They couldn't figure out how to punch. I give them credit for trying to up their game, but, because that's the other thing about UFC. People like the knockouts and the big blows in the UFC, and that's how you make the money. But that's the other thing is the Paul brothers, that was the saddest article when I saw that the other day, and Nate Diaz said he made more in the Paul fight than he made in his entire UFC career. That's really messed up.
That's and like going outside of I guess the Paul or the Paul brothers and them fighting, which is this is live golfification along with the the social media star kind of coming into it. And I mean that's none of it it's Honestly, it just feels like new versions. Like the more that I think about it, right? Because it's like I like Transformers as a kid, and there was like Transformer toy at the, in the Happy Meal, the Transformer T-shirt, right? So it's like a cartoon, but it transcends into all these other fucking things of your world, and like that's what kind of fucking sucks nowadays. Is like for kids, for teenagers, these YouTube stars are, their idols, and like, and they're pop culture idols or whatever. And
And
they buy into whatever the hell they do,
well,
whether it's selling shitty energy drinks or
Mm.
shitty burgers or boxing. I'm
I
sure
am.
like there's people that like moms in the suburbs that are like, this is the first time I'm ever buying a pay-per-view fight, and they don't have no idea why.
Well, interestingly enough, I got a really great guy that's I know here in Athens, Georgia, and he's a like the guidance counselor at one of the local high schools named Montu, and he does really great things for the kids. But he was telling me it's like they don't want to go to college; they want to be influencers at this public school, and you can understand why, because you go to I mentioned that in the thread the other day. People go to college, they get a degree, they come out, even if they're like got a profession, they're lucky if they start off at $50,000. And these idiots are living in a mansion in Los Angeles,
Yep.
and they have, it's really, and I don't know what you do about that, but I mean, it's maybe if we did have communism, we would get rid of influencers.
Get rid of influencers.
But in a weird way,
Yeah, Bill, let's go.
an influencer too.
Well, I want to ask you guys about something that I saw in the documentary thing I watched, which it was so funny. I didn't know this documentary existed. I was watching a documentary about another person that I believe we've talked about on this show before. Johnny Manziel has a Netflix Untold, and it apparently had like come out recently. And after that was over, it was pretty interesting. But once that was over, the Jake Paul thing said, "Oh, do you want to watch this, Jake?" I was like, "Yep." And so I watched it, and what they were doing, and I was talking to Marcus about this earlier, which was something I find very interesting. And they're using the language of big tech, and that's the language of disruption.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, God.
Uber. We disrupted. We're going to be market disruptors, and so when Nate Diaz says, I got paid more with the Pauls than I ever got paid with UFC. And if you think about the fact that the Pauls have come out and really, and the documentary talks about this too, really gone after Dana White, who is an unscrupulous businessman who kind of revels in knowing that he is, the king of shit mountain.
Oh yeah, he loves the fact that he's king of shit mountain. I mean, the dude literally fucking open hand slapped his wife in the face, was videoed, and was just like, so what? It's my wife. Who gives a shit?
Get your own and beat on her too. I don't give a shit.
Like he does not care. And the thing is, between the Fertitta brothers and Endeavor, the two corporations, people in the corporation that bought UFC when Dana was still just like making matches, right? And have really just, they allowed him to act like, they never pulled back, on the leash. The Fertitta brothers were like, well, he used to box, kind of, sort of, so he knows the fight game. We'll just let him run it. And then Endeavor, it's a $1 billion fucking corporation, and they're just like, listen, dude, they're making money. Don't fuck with it. Just let it go. Right. And they've really enabled this behavior from Dana White, who, like you said, it probably was his personality when he was like nobody. But now that he's the head of the most powerful, one of the most powerful sports organizations on the planet, he's like fucking Dr. Evil.